My wife laughed when I sold my last car. 3 months later I returned in a private jet. Welcome back everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. The man from the dealership gave Marcus Thompson $4,000 in cash, counted it out on the hood of the 2016 Accord in 4 neat stacks of 10 hundreds each, and Marcus signed the title transfer without ceremony. The car had been reliable. It had gotten him where he needed to go for 3 years. He shook the dealer's hand, took the envelope, and turned back toward the house. Elena was standing on the front porch. She'd come out at some point during the transaction. He hadn't noticed exactly when, because he'd been focused on the paperwork, the way he focused on paperwork, and she was standing with her arms crossed and her weight shifted to one hip in the specific posture she used when the world was failing to meet her expectations, and she wanted her body to communicate this before her words did. She was wearing the cashmere cardigan she'd bought in November, the one that had appeared on the joint card statement without prior conversation, and she had the phone in her hand that she pointed, briefly, toward the departing dealer and the empty space where the Accord had been, as though documenting the scene for evidence. You actually did it, she said. I did, Marcus said, walking toward her up the porch steps. You sold your car. She said it with the specific inflection of someone repeating a fact that they find so absurd it requires confirmation before they can respond to it fully. Marcus, you sold your only car. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what that looks like? I understand exactly what it means, Marcus said. He went past her into the house. She followed. This was the pattern of these conversations. He moved, she followed, the following being part of the performance, the insistence that the conversation would happen on her terms and in her timeline rather than his. He went to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water and stood at the counter and waited for what was coming, because what was coming had been building since the moment the dealer pulled into the driveway. I have friends coming over Saturday, Elena said. Do you understand that? Justine is coming. Camille. The whole group. And my husband, doesn't have a car. Do you know what that conversation looks like? Do you know what I'm supposed to say when they ask where your car is? Tell them it's being handled, Marcus said. Being handled, she repeated, with the flat, contemptuous echo she used when his words struck her as either naive or deliberately evasive. Marcus, be honest with me. How bad is it? Because selling the car is the kind of thing people do when they're. She paused, and in the pause was the specific cruelty of someone choosing the sharpest available word. When they're desperate. I'm not desperate, Marcus said. Then why did you sell your car? Because I don't need it, he said. She looked at him with the expression she'd been perfecting since approximately the 3rd year of their marriage. The expression of a woman who has decided that the man across from her is either lying or delusional and is not sure which is more aggravating. You don't need a car, she said. Not the way I did before, Marcus said. He could see that this answer was insufficient for her, which he'd known it would be. He could also see, in the set of her jaw and the position of the phone still in her hand and the particular way she was looking at him, that she had already decided what this situation meant and was not going to be redirected from that meaning by anything he said. I cannot, Elena said, and her voice had shifted into the register she used for declarations, the register that meant the following words had been composed and were being delivered rather than arrived at in real time. I cannot keep doing this. I cannot keep being the person who has to explain you to everyone. Justine's husband just bought a boat. An actual boat. Camille's husband bought her that Porsche for Christmas. You saw the photos. And I'm married to a man who just sold his only car for, what did they give you? $5,000. Marcus said. She laughed. It was the real one. Not the social laugh, not the performed amusement she deployed at parties when something wasn't quite funny enough to merit the genuine article. This was the laugh that arrived before her management of it could intercept it, the laugh that came from somewhere honest, and what it was honest about was what Elena Thompson found genuinely, unself-consciously funny, the idea that her husband had sold his last car for $4,000. It lasted 3 seconds. It was the last straw. Not because the laugh was the worst thing she'd ever said to him. It wasn't, by some distance. Not because it was the most public humiliation, because it wasn't that either. It was the last straw because it was the most genuine thing she'd expressed toward him in months, and what it expressed was the complete, unguarded contempt of a woman who had decided, without investigation, that the man she'd married was small. Marcus Thompson set down his water glass. Okay, he said. Okay, she said, the laugh still in her voice. I'm going to take care of some things, he said. I'll be in touch. He went upstairs, packed a bag with the focused efficiency of a man who has been deciding something for a long time and has finally decided it, and he called Vivian Hayes from the car that was no longer his, from the rideshare he'd already arranged, because Marcus Thompson planned things, and he said, "It's time." Vivian said, "I'll have everything ready." He should explain the car. The Accord had been a choice, not a constraint, the same way everything about Marcus Thompson's visible life had been a choice rather than a constraint, a distinction that Elena had never understood because Elena evaluated people's lives by what they displayed and had never once, in 9 years of marriage, thought to ask what he was choosing not to display. The wealth had accumulated quietly, in the way that quiet things accumulate, without announcement, without the press releases and social performances that other kinds of wealth required, through investments and equity positions and 2 company exits and the patient, compound mathematics of money that was managed well and left alone to do what money does when it's managed well and left alone. Marcus had turned the first company exit, a logistics software platform he'd built in 4 years and sold to a larger player in the space, into the seed capital for everything that followed, which Vivian Hayes had structured across a portfolio of vehicles that were legally impeccable and publicly invisible. The second exit had happened during the marriage, which meant Elena had been present for it in the specific way Elena was present for things she found uninteresting, vaguely, sufficiently, with the mild attention of someone aware that her husband had sold a company while not considering it worth understanding in detail. She knew there had been a transaction. She knew it had produced money. She had not asked how much because the question had not occurred to her, which told Marcus everything he needed to know about what she was interested in. What she was interested in was the display, the boat and the Porsche and the visible architecture of a successful life, the external evidence that a man was who he said he was. She was not interested in the ledger, the portfolio, the patient accumulation of a man who believed that quiet money was more powerful than loud money and who had spent 10 years proving this to himself if not to anyone else. He was worth, by the last quarterly summary Vivian had prepared, slightly north of $300 million. He had been driving a 2016 Accord. He had sold it for $4,000 and watched his wife laugh. The 3 months between the Accord and the airport were the best working months Marcus Thompson had experienced in recent memory, which he would later understand was not a coincidence but the direct consequence of removing from his daily environment the specific, low-grade energy expenditure of being misunderstood by someone he loved. He stayed at the Whitmore, which was a hotel in Midtown Atlanta that did not advertise itself aggressively and did not need to, which charged prices that reflected what it actually provided, which was the specific, unobtrusive quality of a space that had been designed by people who understood that luxury was primarily an absence of friction rather than an abundance of visible expense. He had a suite on the 14th floor with east-facing windows and a desk that was sized correctly for someone who worked at desks. He worked at the desk. He worked with the focused, unhurried intensity of a man who has removed every distraction that was not his choice and kept every one that was, who has simplified the environment to the point where the only question the day asks is, "What are you building?" And who has, in the clearing of the environment, discovered that the answer to that question had always been immediate and clear and had simply been somewhat muffled by the background radiation of a marriage that didn't know what it was looking at. The Singapore deal closed in the second month. It was the kind of deal that, when described in financial publications, used the word transformative and meant it, a strategic partnership that restructured the technology portfolio's exposure to Southeast Asian markets in a direction that several analysts would later describe as prescient. Marcus had been working toward it for 14 months, through conversations and relationship building and the patient, incremental construction of trust that significant cross-border transactions required, and it closed on a Tuesday afternoon while he was eating lunch at his desk in the 14th floor suite. He noted it. He sent Vivian a brief message. He finished his lunch. Vivian called him that evening. "The portfolio valuation needs to be updated," she said. "The Singapore close affects several of the interdependent positions." "How significantly?" Marcus asked. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Marcus," Vivian said, and the tone was the one she reserved for moments when the professional relationship was carrying something personal. "How are you?" "I'm building," he said. "I'm better than I've been in years." "The divorce filing," she said. "I've had it ready since the day you called me from the rideshare. I've been waiting for your word." 3 months, he said. "I told you 3 months. You have 2 weeks left." I know, Marcus said. There's one more thing I want to do first. What's that? He told her. Vivian was quiet for 4 seconds, the maximum silence he'd ever heard from her, reserved for things she found genuinely significant. That, she said, is the most specifically perfect thing you've ever said to me. Can it be arranged? He said. By next week, she said. Good, Marcus said. Let's arrange it. Elena's birthday was on a Saturday. This was not a coincidence. Marcus had known it was coming, had known the date for 9 years with the same fidelity he applied to all information about people he cared about, had circled it on the mental calendar when he'd booked his stay at the Whitmore and when he'd had the Singapore conversation with Vivian and when he'd begun the arrangements that Vivian had called specifically perfect. Elena's birthday was on a Saturday, and Justine always hosted her Saturday birthday lunch, and the lunch always included the full circle, Justine and Camille and Brittany and the rotating cast of The Inner Orbit, and this year it was at Justine's house in Buckhead, which Marcus knew because Elena had mentioned it in October, before everything, in the way she mentioned her social calendar, as information she expected him to receive and organize his own life around. He organized his life around it, just not in the way she'd expected. The morning of the Saturday, Marcus Thompson boarded a charter aircraft at Peachtree DeKalb Airport, a Gulfstream G550 that Vivian had arranged through the charter service Marcus used for international travel, a service that knew him as the low-maintenance, highly reliable client who always paid on time and never required the kind of hand-holding that made certain clients expensive regardless of what they spent. He took the single-hour flight to a regional airfield 30 minutes from the city and then back, a round trip that served no logistical purpose except the one it was designed to serve. He landed at PDK at 11:47 in the morning, which was approximately the time that Justine's birthday lunch would be reaching its second mimosa. The driver Vivian had arranged was waiting on the tarmac. Marcus Thompson walked across the tarmac in the autumn sunlight, in the dark suit he'd had made in London 2 years ago that Elena had never seen, carrying the same leather bag he'd packed the day he left, and he felt, not triumph, not the sharp, performative satisfaction of a man making a point, but something quieter and more complete. The feeling of a man who has told the truth about himself at last, in the most specific and unambiguous language available. He got in the car. He said, Justine Harrington's address, please. The driver said, of course. Justine's house was the kind of Buckhead property that communicated its own conclusion. The circular driveway, the deliberately understated landscaping that cost more than conspicuous landscaping would have, the front face of a house that said we don't need to try in the specific architectural language of serious money. Marcus had been here 4 times for dinners Elena had required his attendance at, and he'd stood near windows in this house the way he stood near windows in all of Elena's social environments, patient and observational, present but uncatalogued. Today he rang the doorbell. Justine opened it, which he hadn't expected. He'd expected the housekeeper, and the expression on Justine's face was the most unguarded thing he'd seen from her in 4 years of occasional attendance at her events. She looked at him, at the suit, at the car visible in the circular driveway, at the composure of a man who has arrived somewhere he fully intends to be. Marcus, she said. Justine, he said. Happy birthday to Elena. I was hoping to say hello. She stepped back and let him in. The lunch was in the sunroom. Justine's sunroom had the specific, warm quality of a space that got afternoon light in all seasons, and the table had been set with the particular, careful attention of a woman who took the visual presentation of her hospitality seriously. 8 women around the table, champagne and the remnants of a first course, the conversation in progress quality of a gathering that had found its rhythm. Elena saw him when he came through the doorway. The sequence on her face was something he would carry for a long time, not as a source of satisfaction, but as information, the final and clearest piece of information about who she was when the world refused to be what she'd arranged it to be. First, the recognition, the instant identification of a face in a context where that face was not expected. Second, the rapid assessment, the suit, the bearing, the confidence that was different in quality from the confidence of a man who was pretending or performing, different in the way that real things are always different from their imitations. Third, something she was still processing when Marcus began to speak, the recalibration of an entire understanding, arriving in real time. Marcus, she said, and his name had its own sequence. Surprise, caution, the beginning of the managed version, all of it moving across the syllables of his own name. Happy birthday, he said. The table had gone the specific quiet of a room that has understood it is witnessing something. Why are you? She looked at the suit again, at his hands, at the absence of everything she expected him to be carrying. How did you get here? I flew in this morning, Marcus said. From where? Here, actually, he said. I took a flight to give the landing a purpose. He looked at her with the direct, complete attention he gave to things that mattered for the last time. I wanted to return the right way. Return from what? She said, and something in her voice was doing the arithmetic of the past 3 months without permission. The hotel, the silence, the calls he'd answered briefly and then not at all, the way his absence had settled into the house without the drama she'd expected it to produce. I've been working, Marcus said. Which is what I was always doing, before. He looked around the table. At Justine, who was watching with the focused attention of a woman who had understood from the moment she opened the door that this was important, and at Camille, whose mention of the Porsche at a dinner party had been one of the sentences that had sharpened the outline of a decision he'd already made, and at Brittany, and at the others. I want to be honest with all of you, because honesty is the reason I came here rather than simply calling Elena, which would have been easier. Marcus. Elena started. 3 months ago, he said, Elena laughed at me because I sold my car. Not a performative laugh, the real one. Because she believed, genuinely, that selling a car for $4,000 meant I was broke. Desperate, was the word she used. He said it without heat, without the sharp register of someone using a word as a weapon. She'd been operating on that assumption for years. It was the assumption behind the conversations you've all had about what Elena deserved and what Marcus could or couldn't provide. It was the assumption behind the boat and the Porsche comparisons. It was the assumption I allowed because I was watching something and needed it to run its course. The table was completely still. I don't drive a car because I don't need to drive a car, Marcus said. I charter aircraft. I have, for some time. The Accord wasn't a limitation. It was a choice, the same way living modestly was a choice, the same way not performing my financial situation for an audience was a choice. He looked at Elena. The portfolio Vivian manages for me closed the Singapore deal 6 weeks ago. You can read about what that did to the valuation in the financial press if you'd like the details. The short version is that I'm in a different category than the one you've been describing to your friends. He gave the sentence the room to settle. I'm filing for divorce on Monday, he said. Vivian Hayes is handling everything. You'll be treated fairly, more than fairly, because that's who I am regardless of what's happened. He looked at his wife, at the woman he had married with genuine love and watched change into someone who had decided he was insufficient, at the woman who had laughed with the real laugh when he sold his car, at the woman who was now sitting at her birthday lunch with a look on her face that contained more information than her face usually shared. I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here because you deserve to know the truth of what you've been dismissing, and because I deserve to say it clearly, once, in a room that includes the people you've said it to. Elena's composure had arrived at its edge and was deciding what to do there. The car, she said, and her voice was quiet, stripped of the registers that usually occupied it. You sold it because you didn't need it. I sold it because I have a car service and a charter account and a driver, and the Accord was sitting in a driveway being unused, Marcus said. I sold it because someone would use it. And I watched you assume the selling meant I was failing. I didn't know. No, Marcus said. You didn't. And the reason you didn't is that I never told you. And the reason I never told you is that I was learning something about what you needed from a marriage and who you were when you thought your husband had less. He held her gaze with the honest, unperforming attention he'd always given her at her best. What I learned was clear. And I'm sorry it took me this long to act on it. He looked at Justine. I'm sorry for the interruption. Happy birthday to Elena. He walked back through the sunroom and the hallway and the entrance of Justine's house and out into the Buckhead morning, where the driver was waiting in the circular driveway with the patience of someone paid to wait and inclined to do it professionally. He got in. He said, the airport, please. Elena called 11 times in the 3 days between the birthday lunch and Vivian's filing. Marcus answered twice. The first time, she apologized, the genuine apology, the one that had nothing left to manage it, the stripped-down honesty of a woman who had seen clearly, in Justine's sunroom with 7 other people present, the specific shape of what she'd been doing and what it had cost. He received it with the honesty it deserved. I believe you. It doesn't change where we are. The second time, she asked if he would reconsider. He said, no. She said, I loved you. Past tense or present. The sentence was grammatically ambiguous and he chose not to ask. He said, I know. And that's what makes this sad rather than angry. Goodbye, Elena. The divorce was filed on Monday and handled by Vivian with the thorough, organized competence that had made her worth every dollar Marcus had paid her over 15 years of professional relationship. The settlement was generous. Marcus had instructed her to be generous, because he was not interested in punishment, had never been interested in punishment, had always understood that the point was not to take something from someone but to reclaim what was his. His dignity, his self-definition, the right to be known on his own terms. Those were the things that couldn't be divided in a settlement. Those were the things he'd already reclaimed before the papers were filed. The financial terms were fair to Elena and clean for Marcus, which was what fair and clean looked like when handled by someone who understood the difference between justice and revenge. Justine called the week after the filing. "I want to apologize," she said, without preamble, in the voice of a woman who had spent several days composing what she wanted to say and had arrived at the decision that the composition was irrelevant and the apology was what mattered. "You don't owe me an apology," Marcus said. "I participated in conversations about you that weren't fair," she said. "I let Elena describe you in ways I never questioned because it wasn't my marriage and because," she stopped. Restarted. "Because I was more comfortable with the version of you she presented than I was with asking whether the version was true." "Most people are," Marcus said. "That's not a character flaw. That's how social information works." "The Singapore deal," she said. "I looked it up. I figured you would," he said. "Marcus," she said, "what you built, what you've been building, that's extraordinary." "It's work," he said. "Sustained over time, with good advice and patience. The extraordinary part is mostly the patience." She laughed, not the dinner party laugh, the real one, and in the realness of it Marcus heard something of the person Justine might have been in a different social arrangement, one that didn't require the performance she'd spent years maintaining. "Take care of yourself," she said. "I will," Marcus said. "You too." The Marcus Thompson Foundation for Dignified Work incorporated 3 months after the divorce was finalized, in a process that Vivian organized with her characteristic combination of legal precision and practical efficiency. Its name had been arrived at through the same process Marcus applied to anything that mattered: patience, revision, and the insistence on accuracy over impression. The Foundation's mission was specific and practical, which was how Marcus preferred missions: to support men who had been systematically undervalued in their intimate relationships, providing financial literacy education, legal resource navigation for those in divorce proceedings, mentorship for first-generation wealth builders whose work was happening below the visibility threshold of the people around them, and a community program designed to address the specific, compound damage of being known incorrectly by the person who was supposed to know you best. The financial literacy curriculum Marcus designed himself, from the inside of his own experience, over 3 weeks at the kitchen table of the new house, the real one, the one he'd finally bought for himself, sized correctly for a man who worked from home more than he went to offices, with east-facing windows and a garden and a driveway that was usually empty because Marcus Thompson didn't need a car in the way people assumed men of his resources needed cars. He taught the first session of the curriculum himself, to 27 men in a conference room on a Saturday morning in Atlanta, and he told them the story they needed to hear, not as motivation, not as a performance of his own resilience, but as accurate information about what it looked like when a man decided to stop managing himself down to the size of someone else's assumption. He told them, the people who decide your worth based on your car are telling you something about their metric, not about your value. He told them, modesty is not inadequacy. Living beneath your means is not the same as living beneath your potential. The discipline to not display is one of the most powerful forms of financial intelligence available to anyone who can maintain it. He told them, the question that saves you is the one no one in your immediate circle is asking, which is, what is he actually building? Ask it about yourself. Answer it honestly. Build accordingly. He told them, someone laughed at me when I sold my car. 3 months later, I returned in a private jet. I'm not telling you that for the satisfaction of the reversal. I'm telling you because the 3 months between the laugh and the jet were the most productive months of my professional life, and what made them productive was the clarity that arrived when I stopped absorbing someone else's assessment of my worth and started living inside my own. 27 men in a conference room on a Saturday morning listened with the focused, personal attention of people receiving information they could use. On a morning in December, Marcus Thompson walked across the tarmac at Peachtree DeKalb Airport in the early Atlanta light, the low, amber light of a Georgia winter morning that did its particular work on every surface it found, making the world look both exactly as it was and slightly more itself than usual, And he thought about the Accord. He thought about the $4,000 in 4 stacks of 10 hundreds, counted out on the hood by a man from the dealership who shook his hand after and drove away in a car that would serve him or someone after him for years, because it was that kind of car. He thought about Elena on the front porch in the cashmere cardigan, the phone in her hand, the posture of a woman communicating disappointment before she'd said a word. He thought about the laugh. Not with pain, the pain had metabolized, the way pain always does when you give it the right conditions and enough time and the honest attention it requires to complete its transit. With the clear, factual regard of a man who has understood something and integrated it and carried it forward as information rather than wound. The laugh had told him something true about the marriage. That it was organized around her assessment of him rather than her knowledge of him. That the 9 years had contained real moments, real warmth, real shared history, real things that had been genuine, and that none of those genuine things had been sufficient to build an accurate picture of who he was in the mind of the woman he'd married. He'd been seen incorrectly. He'd spent 9 years being seen incorrectly, and the laugh was the moment the incorrectness became undeniable even to him. He was grateful for it. Not in the way of someone performing gratitude for a painful experience, the therapeutic language of converting suffering into growth. In the way of a man who understands that clarity, however it arrives, is worth having, and that the laugh had arrived with more clarity than any other moment of the previous 9 years had managed. He'd built something real in the 3 months that followed. He was building something real now. He would continue building, in the patient, unhurried way he built everything, long after the story of the laugh and the car and the Buckhead birthday lunch had become simply one chapter in an ongoing account of a man who chose to be known accurately or not at all. Captain Reyes was at the bottom of the stairs, as he always was when Marcus flew, with the specific, warm professionalism of a man who understood that his job was to make the journey as clean and unencumbered as the destination required. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," he said. "Beautiful day for it." "It really is," Marcus said. He climbed the stairs. He settled into the forward cabin seat, the one by the window, the one from which Atlanta was visible in the distance as the aircraft taxied, the city he'd been born in and built in and never needed to leave to find what he was looking for, spread in its December morning below the growing altitude, the neighborhoods and the offices and the Buckhead house where a birthday lunch had happened and the hotel where he'd worked through a Singapore deal and the foundation's office where 27 men had sat in folding chairs on a Saturday morning and listened with the attention of people who could use what they were hearing. He opened his laptop. The work was there, waiting, the way it was always waiting, patient, available, the most reliable thing in his life. He worked until Atlanta was a small arrangement of light below the clouds, and then below the horizon, and then gone entirely, replaced by the clean, open expanse of sky that had no opinions about him and asked nothing except that he be exactly where he was. Which he was. Completely, finally, and entirely himself. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If it moved you, like, share, and comment on the lessons you took from it. Let me know where you're watching from, and I'll see you in the next video.